It's been a couple of weeks since we've had a Thinking Thursday, and I do like to do them, providing that we can have a little bit of variety and interest. Joined today by Ian Foster, the GBGB owners rep. Ian, it's nice to speak to you again. I think the last time we spoke was on Derby final night, was it not?
Yeah, that's right, Floyd. I spoke to a lot of people and you were one of them on Derby final night. Sadly, I didn't get to speak to everybody I wanted to speak to or could have spoken to, but it was such a good night and there were so many of us there. And even staying on until about midnight after the racing had long since finished, there were just so many people to interact with. I had a wonderful time. I'm sure you did as well. It is a good Derby final night. There's a lot of atmosphere. It was nice to see the retired dogs. I'm not bitter about the fact I bought a round of drinks that was more than £50, but that's another matter. And now it's rather back to the day job. It always seems to be dealing with issues. We've had the Derby, that was the pinnacle, as you were, of everybody's happiness and enjoyment about the sport. And now we're back to focusing on the lack of places for retired dogs, issued with track preparation, you know, the usual stuff, the day-to-day issues that we have to deal with to keep the sport going forward.
Yes, of course. I'm just trying to picture who would have sneaked themselves into that 50 quid round. There are a few likely suspects, and there was a few of them I spotted at Toaster on the day. So we probably better leave that one be.
I think we ought to.
Immediately, I think, or on either side of the Derby, you were arranging some meetings with various owners groups. I'm kind of a little bit hesitant to ask because in general, when people set out to do these kind of things, we end up with a certain amount of disappointment in a lack of engagement, and whether that be through because everybody's happy and thinks that the industry's so well run, or they're just generally so dissatisfied they don't want to engage, or they think it's a pointless exercise and engaging anyway. How did things come out as far as you were concerned?
I decided it was important not to canvass everybody's views on everything, but to be available to hear their views and to put them forward as and when it was appropriate. And that's the reason I'm trying to go around all the tracks so that anybody who doesn't want to contact me by email or by phone can actually grab me and we can have a chat. And so I started at Newcastle. I've since been to Pelaw Grange, Nottingham, Sheffield, obviously Toaster Derby final night. Next month, I'm going to Romford, Crayford and Hove for the final of the Regency. And I'm trying to encourage people that if they have issues they want to be considered or just to discuss, maybe if there's an explanation I can give because they're not clear on something and it's something I actually know about, I will be very happy to explain it to them. And I can't do much more than make myself available by email when I go on TV for them to send in questions and by turning up in person. And it's been slightly disappointing that not that many people choose to do so. If anything, the group that I'm hearing from most is owner trainers who have quite a lot of perceived problems at the moment. And they're the ones who are contacting me and wanting assistance, rather more than the owners themselves. But all I can do is to continue to make myself available by these various different means. And I'm very, very happy to speak to people. I've spoken to one today. I'm available. Let's have a chat if there's something you want to know or discuss. I don't think quite enough people are doing that. Whether that's because they think we're a dead loss and we can't achieve anything, I hope that's not the case, and I really don't think so. Is it because the sport is so fantastic that there aren't any issues? Well, I very much doubt it's that. To be honest, I can't really put a finger on why people aren't interacting as much as they should. I really wish they would.
Of the gripes input, however way you choose to use it, that you've had so far, what would be the main topics of the main concerns?
There's no doubt that owners would prefer dog meetings to start later in the evening and to finish later in the evening. They see that partly because it's going to be easier to bring new people into the sport that way, because people aren't often able to get to a meeting for 6 minutes past 6 in the evening. There was one particular case, an owner I spoke to at Romford, who really wanted to take his staff to the track by way of a thank you, particularly on a Friday, I think he had in mind. But he can't, because that would mean them actually closing the office early if they were to get to the meeting for the start. And he doesn't think that's appropriate. So in a way, the track is thereby losing out on quite a bit of extra business. It's a really thorny issue, this of starting later and finishing later, because the evening times are so interwoven with the horse race meetings. They're the subject of media rights payments. It's not going to be easy just to shift the racing back to later. The bookmakers aren't going to want there to be a big gap between the end of the afternoon session, the beginning of the evening one. So what do? Extend the afternoon, extend the evening? Have we got enough dogs to do that? A lot of tracks are going to say we don't have enough dogs to do that. We're struggling to put on the races we've got now without adding extra ones to increase the length of the program. So that's a thorny issue that we've got to look at over time. I have spoken to the main promoters about this, and I've sown the seed that the feedback I'm getting is that people want to start and finish later. To that extent, the ball's in their court, and I'm sure they're going to be looking at it.
It's interesting because I had a really enjoyable discussion with Karen McMillan last week, and that was one of the things that she was tackling, and that's why the Romford meeting's now gone that little bit later. And as she said, they have quite a young, vibrant group of spectators that love to go to the racing and then go on night clubbing after, and they can keep them there that little bit longer. The timing works better. Otherwise, there's a little bit of a gap. You're finishing your racing at 9:30 for a lot of these younger people. That's a little bit too early for when they want to hit the clubs. So it can work.
It was interesting when I went to Sheffield. I made a point of going into the casino, which is part of the same complex, immediately afterwards, and speaking to people who transferred from the Greyhound meeting into the casino. That was a Tuesday, though, which doesn't necessarily reflect the success of that arrangement, because people tend to go out a bit more and stay a bit later for the Friday meeting than they do the Tuesday. But there was still a handful of people in there whose usual regime is to go to the Greyhound meeting, then on to the casino. So that's something that I think does work. It's historically difficult, isn't it? Because Greyhound tracks don't tend to be in the middle of the city. They tend to be a little bit further out for obvious reasons. And people need to be able to go on somewhere to complete their evening out. Newcastle seem to have done quite well with getting stag and hen do's in their afternoon fixtures for them to start their drinking experience before they move on to somewhere else and then somewhere else for the rest of the night. That's working for them. I had a long chat with Dave when I was up there, Dave, the overall manager, and this is one of the things that they've been pursuing, to get more people into the afternoon meetings. And they're having some success with that. But you actually have to go out and try really hard to bring these people in. And this is something we're looking to do at the GBGB. We had a good meeting yesterday to try and build on the success of the Mickey's Barrett story from the Derby, which we all know was superb, and it captured headlines within the sport and outside of the sport, which is very important. And we're now looking into ways to maximize the attraction of syndication. This is something that I know lots of people within the sport are keen to pursue, and we're equally keen to do so. And we've set the ball rolling on that. What I ultimately think will happen is that part of the new expanded owners portal on the website will include a much greater and expanded site in relation to syndication, going into the most basic detail for people who've never been involved in the sport before as to what a syndicate is, what they need to do, how much money is required, and in particular, which trainers at which tracks are happy to help them. The idea being that the trainers will source the dogs for them and we'll help them along the way. And then the task, and perhaps the biggest task, is going to get the social media contacts other forms of marketing to direct people towards the website and the idea of syndication. And even if they can't emulate Mickey's Barrett to that extent of success, to bring lots of other players into the sport that way. So that's something we're looking at, and we're very much chasing that.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with someone yesterday and was saying that when, as a young whippersnapper, as a young kennel lad, I can remember the GRA operated a policy where, of course, at one stage they had bred their own dogs, but they had dogs available. Now, I'm aware that there are a number of promoters that have been forced to buying dogs and giving them to trainers. And it just seemed to me, perhaps, I don't know, an opportunity there, particularly for them to say, instead of just giving the trainer the dog, is to make these dogs available for lease, even if it's on a reasonably short term, you know, a 6-month lease or something of that nature. But to actually have the dogs available, because one of the issues is an owner wants a dog. Oh yes, that seems a good idea. Me and my 6 mates, we're going to have a dog. So by the time the trainer's got the dog, got it over from Ireland, by the time he sourced it itself might be a few weeks. By the time he's got it over from Ireland, presumably it's coming from Ireland, gone through all its testing, gone through its trials, gone through everything else, you're possibly talking 2 or 3 months before they even get their first runner. Whereas if the tracks, they have the dogs available, they bought the dogs, they place them with the trainers anyway. If they were to simply to say, listen, the dog he's running on Saturday night, you can come along and he can be your dog, should you choose. I don't know, have I got that wrong? It just seems to be a little bit of lateral thinking.
I don't think there are many trainers out there who don't have dogs that they own themselves that could very easily be put into a form of syndication. There's been a lot of exchanges on social media today about the logjam in rehoming centres. I know I spent a day recently with my local rehoming centre over in Fife, GR Fife. Jimmy and Celia over there run a fantastic operation. I'm sure it's one of the best in the country. I seem to recall they had 57 dogs on site. They're almost full, but not quite. A lot of the other centres around the country are completely full. And I was reading today that there are a lot of trainers who own their own dogs who are unable to get them into a rehoming centre and are therefore unable to take in any other dogs, particularly paying ones. And this is one of the negative effects of owners and trainers being one and the same. When the dog stops running, that trainer ceases to have any income. If, of course, it was an owner-placed dog, the owner would continue to be responsible and would continue to pay a kennel bill until the dog can be put in a homing centre. But when the trainers own them themselves, that's no longer the case. And there really does seem to be a logjam developing. And my concern will be that if we have too many dogs that are owned by the trainers, and it ultimately proves difficult to shift them and find a home for them, we're going to have a bit of stagnation. And whilst we clearly do need more dogs to be available for running, we also have to be able to get more dogs into the rehoming centres and out to find a satisfactory couch. And that's something that we've got to concentrate on as well. I had another idea which I'm pursuing with our IT assistants, and that is to follow a handful of families who have retired greyhounds. I've signed 2 up to this as potentially suitable families already. And what we're proposing to do is to generate websites which contain stories about the dogs, their owner, the families, how wonderful they are as pets, but also to reflect back on what a good time they had as racers. And to put the lie to the ridiculous stories that continue to be broadcast by antis. I was reading one today about retired greyhounds being hung from trees. It is absolutely preposterous that they can continue to put out stories like this. And unfortunately, there are lots of members of the general public who pay attention to that more so than the success stories. And we want to redress that balance by getting the story out there to everybody that these were great athletes. They did what they loved to do. They're now on a sofa. They're now in a family. They're having a wonderful time. And they simply aren't fed on marshmallows and gunpowder and hung from trees, as so many of the antis would have us believe. So that doesn't directly answer your question. But these are all the current topics that we're having to deal with. And it's keeping me quite busy.
Yeah, I mean, I want to be entirely constructive on this, but are we not in a situation where a lot of these problems are brought on by the tracks themselves? In the first instance, I'm aware of at least one track where at the end of COVID, the promoter really didn't want to open the place, quite happy to take the betting shop money. And in fact, it was openly complaining to some of his regulars that it wasn't worth opening, and in terms of staffing and health and safety and everything else, and was very, very reluctant. That then leads on to the second argument, that why the hell would anybody want to be an owner? The way that so many of the owners have been treated, the tracks have, in many cases, and not all cases, but a significant number of tracks have kind of been fairly indifferent to the number of owners, and they voted with their feet. Nobody's thrown them out of the industry. They've chosen not to continue. Ultimately, it will be the tracks, or it will be the bookmakers that will be paying the price when these greyhounds have to be rehomed by the trainers, or they have to. Can you see my point? We're going to get a logjam with greyhounds, as you said. The homing centres are full, partially now because people have returned dogs as they've returned to work after COVID. This was explained to me by Tony Collett last week. So many of these kennels now, people have gone back to work, had a greyhound while they were off work, while they were furloughed. Those kennels are now full again. The owner option is actually financially prudent, but the tracks in many cases don't seem to be looking at the larger picture. They just seem to be looking at, what can we do next week? How much money can we get in from the betting shops?
I'm quite sure those tracks that you're referring to are only looking at the bottom line, and they're doing so in the short term. They're a business, that's a matter for them. But as the sports governing and regulatory body, that's not the way we need to look at it at all. We have to make sure that going forward, the sport is as robust as possible. And that unquestionably needs owners, and the more owners, the better. And we're determined to bring as many owners in as we possibly can. And I can only encourage the tracks that are not taking the same view as us, that they need to look at this again, because the only way to bring in new blood is to get them to the track. We aren't going to get a lot of non-greyhound people to become interested in the sport by watching it on TV. That's a step further on. They need to have an experience that they enjoy by visiting the track. We've done quite a bit of surveying over the years. This was long before I became involved with the GBGB, and we've got a very good idea who our target audience is. There's a large proportion of people who will have nothing to do with greyhound racing and never will do. They're against it, they see nothing in it. That's perhaps 60% of the people out there. We have a small core who are interested, which isn't very great. It's 4 or 5% of the population who have a definite interest in it. But that leaves 30-odd% who might be interested, who are slightly interested, and who aren't opposed to it on ideological or other grounds. And if we could get a fraction of those people to become interested, we could get a lot more people through the door. There would be better ownership. We'd have less trainers who had their own dogs, and we wouldn't have any tracks who are having to provide dogs because nobody else will. And I'm hoping that one way or another, we can persuade all of the tracks that it's necessary to follow us down that route. That if we offer incentives, if the track offers incentives, we can get people to go along, see that it is a good night. And if 1 in 10 of the people that we got to go along actually came back again, we'd be multiplying the audience numbers manyfold compared to what they are now. And I genuinely believe it's a short-term view to want to keep owners and spectators and punters out of the stadia and just to take the bookmakers' money. Why not take both? I mean, that makes absolute sense to me. You're getting the bookmakers' money. Why not get other money as well and secure the long-term future of the sport? That seems obvious, and that's the route we want to go down.
I think it's a great theory. I'm still to be convinced that some of the promoters, and as I said, I don't want to brand them all together because they vary so greatly. So I have some of the promoters are personal friends, but some of them just don't get it. I just don't, as you said, they don't see the longer term, that they're simply looking at next week and the week after. And sooner or later, this is going to cost the whole industry. It won't be just them, because that money that the bookmakers are making available is basically being wasted. But I think we'll need to move on.